I'm Batman.
Well, I hardly think so. The real Cape Crusader calls his crime-fighting cohorts when he's running late.
I had to walk. I couldn't get Raj on the back of my scooter.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. Aquaman sucks.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Geekend. You may recall last week our episode was on the top 10 Nintendo 64 games of all time. That was part 1. Now we're about to give you part 2. Part 1, we went through numbers 10 through 5. Tonight, we have the top 4 Nintendo 64 games of all time. Get excited. This is the Elite 4, if you will, of the Nintendo 64 games. We're going to be talking about each one of those in depth. So if you have not seen the first part of this yet, if you have not yet watched part 1 where we go through numbers 10 through 5, I highly recommend you go ahead and go to that one right now so that you're not behind, and then come back and watch the top 4 to complete that list.
The Tactics Top 10.
Now, for those of you that are new to the top 10, we'll go ahead and explain how this works. So the way that it works is our 4 panelists that we got together to decide on this list, we each submitted our own list independently without conferring with one another so that we wouldn't influence one another's opinions. And then we look at all of the list and give them points based on how highly they scored. For example, if I pick something as my favorite game on the Nintendo 64, put it at number 1, it gets 10 points. If I pick something as my number 2, it gets 9 points, and so on and so forth. We lump them all together, do the math, figure out which is the best game of all time, and give them a ranking based on that. So that's how that works. And for tonight, we have 3 panelists with us that participated in this event. Tonight we have Chris, Justin, and Andrew. So we're going to go to them. Let's get started right now.
Number 4.
Number 4 on this list is Star Fox 64. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Andrew on this one.
Let me go ahead and say that starting from number 5 and going on, any of these could have been number 1 for me. That's just how good these games were. Star Fox, I was never good at it, but man, it was so fun. and when I first found out that you could play a tank, like it was like a year after the game had been out, and someone was like, "Oh yeah, you can get a tank." I'm like, "What?"
You can do a barrel roll in a tank.
That's I had no idea, but I don't know. I could play that game over and over, just to hear some of the funny little lines. Oh man,
personally, I prefer the air.
Isn't that technically Smash Brothers, not Star Fox 64 though?
Which one?
Isn't that quote, personally I prefer the air, isn't that from Smash Brothers? Like, isn't that where it originated?
I'm not certain. I feel like it was in one of the Landmaster missions in Star Fox.
Oh, maybe he did say it
Falco
in that one.
came in as backup.
Maybe he did say it in one of those and I just missed it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh no, that was about it. I was gonna say, and playing against, was his name Andros? Was that the guy's final?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you got to that mission where it was like against his head and his hands, man, you felt like you were a baller, and your hands were always sweaty after you got done playing that mission. Like it was just that intense, and man, it's another one of those games. It could be number 1 for me on any list just because of the nostalgia it brings back. I want to say that they didn't they make another Star Fox?
They've
like
made
on the game
Armada.
I want to say
Star
that
Fox Armada.
And
the
I didn't
GameCube was very different. The GameCube Star Fox was very different.
Maybe that's what it was, but I didn't like, even though the game was super simple, and it was basically just like you sit there and you go wherever the ship tells you to go, or the map, it moves with the map.
Right, it's an on-rail shooter.
Yeah, but it was so good. Like, maybe it was a little bit of the characters, too. I feel like we all have a group of friends that's like the group from Star Fox. Like this, we all have that.
Dibs on Falco.
You can be Falco. I want to be the bunny.
Actually, I'm really more Fox than anybody, but yeah, I know what you mean.
But yeah, excellent game. I recommend that to anybody.
The main thing I remember enjoying about it was the multiplayer, actually. I had a friend in elementary school and into high school, BJ Causey, and I'd go over to his house and we'd play the multiplayer fights a lot. You get a dog fighting in the R wings, and you get up there and then you do the loop de loop and get around behind them. You could shoot the bombs at them if you got the bombs and whatnot. But yeah, and the legacy of Star Fox. I don't know. I guess I have some disagreement here, but I really liked the Star Fox GameCube version. Actually, that was the first game I did not like first-person shooters as a kid, and that was the first.
Have enough scarabs.
That was the first game that I was like, okay, fine, I'll try the dual stick first person shooter control, because I expected it to be like Star Fox 64 where you're in the vehicle the whole time. It turns out a lot of the game you're walking around, not first person, but third person shooter,
Right.
but it's still the dual stick control going on. And the multiplayer in that was so much fun. In Star Fox Armada, you could get out of the R-Wing, turn around and shoot a rocket launcher at the R-Wing behind you, and then get back in. So, like, a lot of my respect for Star Fox 64 is its place in Nintendo lore, that it got me into the Star Fox series to enjoy Armada as well, and the multiplayer in it, dogfighting R-Wings, so much fun.
Yeah, most of it's already been said, but I guess I do want to hammer first on the level design. The level design was really interesting, even if it was on rails. Star Fox, as opposed to Rogue Squadron, Star Fox played more like an arcade game, but it was a souped-up arcade game. It wasn't like, it wasn't simple and boring and anything like that. It was still fun, it was still interesting, and it was still complex, and you had the maneuvers, and you had the rings, and you had bombs and all sorts of stuff. And also, if I remember correctly, you could progress through the story in different ways, right? It was a branching story, too, which I thought it was also interesting. And the multiplayer was fun. It was just a really, really good time.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to mention, and you guys have all alluded to part of this, but I honestly am not somebody who played a lot of Star Fox, and it's partly just because I'm not a big fan of shooters, whether you're, actually first-person shooter, third-person shooter, or just a arcade style with the ships or whatever. It's just not my thing. I don't know why, but I do respect not only Star Fox's contributions to Nintendo lore, but another thing that I really appreciate about it, and I think that a lot of people probably don't realize, this was the first game to have a rumble feature, period. Like, this was at a time where that wasn't standard, and now can you even think of a game that has come out in the past, 10 years that doesn't have rumble features? Like, it not only had a massive impact on Nintendo, because of course it did, but it had a massive impact on how games are played across the board, every console, everything. So you have to respect some of the things that it brought to the table, and Nintendo, sometimes it does things that make a lot of sense. Sometimes it misses the mark when it comes to its innovation, but you got to give them props. They innovate, and a lot of their stuff has been copied by other game companies. Star Fox 64 has been a big part of that.
Number 3.
Number 3 on this list is one of my all-time favorites. I cannot wait to talk about this game, Super Mario 64. One of the all-time classics. What do you have to say on this one, Ward?
Well, I think the best feature ever was the wing cap, especially at the end of the game where you could just fly around the castle and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But yeah, shoot, each level just unique and interesting environments, and you had multiple stars. You could go a puzzle route, you could go a boss fight route. There were like multiple different play styles, and you didn't necessarily have to do them all, but they were all available to you in a not open world kind of game, which is kind of rare. Usually it's either open world or straight linear. But yeah, that was a classic game. And I played it, I think I borrowed it from somebody or maybe rented it or something like that on the N64, and then I played it again on the 3DS. And another thing too, it really defined how platform games were. There were so many different types of jumps and moves that you could do that it seemed like it explored areas that platform games hadn't really explored up until that point.
Oh, for sure. And one thing that I wanted to bring up about this one, and you kind of made a perfect segue to it, the thing that I love about this game so much And well, actually, there's several things, but one of the things that I really love about this game so much is the variety of movement. Now, you would be, I think, you could easily forgive the first 3D platformer ever made from being a little wonky, not really controlling all that well, the controls being somewhat counterintuitive. And to be fair, Super Mario 64 is not a perfect game. There's some issues with camera control. But as far as like actually moving Mario, manipulating him and moving around the different areas, like that's pretty much flawless. And it's a formula that Nintendo has tweaked very little ever since. Because if you play Mario Odyssey today, there's some new moves and they've fine-tuned a few things, but the basic concept is pretty much the same as it was in Nintendo 64.
Yeah, so I think one of the most memorable things about Mario 64 is just how much content there was. And I forget how many different zones there were, 8, 10,
15.
something like that. How many?
15.
15. Okay, 15 different levels, basically, that you could play in, 6 to 8 different ways, depending on which star you were going for.
Right.
That's so much of an experience in a game during a time where games couldn't afford to have as much content. So it's incredible what they were able to achieve with what they had. And not only that, but I think, like was mentioned earlier, the difference in experiences, because one level might be a collecting kind of level if you're looking after red coins. One might be a racing level where you're racing that annoying penguin. There's such a variety and depth of experiences, and I still remember most of those levels. Like I can picture them in my head of running through those levels, and I don't know, it just really left a lasting mark.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true because as much as I love Super Mario Galaxy, and I do, I think it's it's just a phenomenal platforming game. I can't name but maybe 3 levels in Super Mario Galaxy. I can name every single level in Super Mario 64 and could navigate it to this day. I would be able to pick it up right now, as many years it's been since I've played it, and not get lost in any of those levels. I would know exactly where I was at every point because of how much I played this.
One more thing.
Yeah.
The music. I thought the music was pretty good.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
I still remember a lot of the music, too.
Bum, 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 ba-da-ba-bum.
Yep.
Bum,
And
bum, ba-da-ba-bum.
I can't forget
Or the Bowser
music
theme.
from racing the penguin. I did that level so many times.
Bun, dun, dun, dun. No, that's Yoshi. I'm sorry. Oh, man. What is that one? I totally just did the Yoshi theme, though.
This was the first game that I played on the N64, and prior to playing that, I think the only games that I'd played, were obviously Super Nintendo games and Pokemon games on the Nintendo handheld Game Boy. My goodness, it's been that long. Wow. So it was like a huge dive into the gaming world for me, being able to play on all those levels, having challenges that, were outside of what gaming usually had. Everything was so linear in every Super Nintendo game that I ever played.
Mhm.
Like it was all, you start here, you finish here, and you really need to do like these 3 things in the level to make sure that you get there. And Mario, it was a complete change for me. I think probably my favorite thing was, first off, that never-ending staircase and not knowing that it was never ending. And then you tried to do the super long jump and say, like, maybe if I do it enough times, I'm going to get to the top. No.
Have you seen those memes, those GIFs that it's like, you won't believe what's on the other side of this door or something like that? It's one of those things that just is a constant loop. That's what that was like. Nintendo was the original one to come up with that joke, just to see how long they could get 8-year-olds to try to run up that staircase.
Years, Caleb, years is how long we were on that staircase. But no, it was great. I loved that game, and I couldn't remember any of it, outside of like that, and beating Bowser was super cool, grabbing his tail and stuff. But other than that, like I could play that game all day again. I think actually, because all of us have advanced so far in gaming, that sounds really. But since we are at a different point in our lives in gaming, I bet we could probably go back and beat Mario in a day. But back then, where it was in history and gaming, man, it was like the pinnacle of what gamers wanted to see in a Mario game, especially. So,
yeah, and that was one point I wanted to bring up too, and you kind of hinted at it, so I'll just kind of expound on that. The thing that is so fantastic about this game, and I love this game. It's one of my all-time favorites. The thing that's so great about it is that when you look back and look at it in the context of they completely reinvented the wheel. Nobody would blame Nintendo for basically just making a brand new Super Mario Brothers game. Use the old formula, make it something that, I don't know, maybe you could have incorporated 3D, but make it basically something where you go through a very linear level, find the flag at the end, and then, go through 8 worlds and then beat Bowser. That formula had worked for them for a really long time. They departed so far from that they made basically 2 completely different games. Because if you look at the Super Mario Brothers that are side-scrollers, they're completely different than anything in the 3D Marios where you have you go and collect something like Power Stars. I mean, every 3D platformer did that for a while. Banjo-Kazooie, Crash Bandicoot, all of those 3D platformers, they all copied off of Mario 64 because it did it so well. And another thing that's important to note in that is that Nintendo did this basically coming up with it just out of nowhere, applying the Mario charm and the Mario formula to it, and they did it as a launch title. Think about how profound it is that we're looking at what are the best games of this console of all time, and one that is very high on the list at number 3 is a game that actually came out at the same time as the console. Nintendo didn't need any fine-tuning. They didn't have to sort of take their time and work to perfect it. They nailed it right out of the gate, and I think that is something that they should be commended for sure.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
Nintendo 64 is a launch title, so.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that wasn't the era of gaming where you didn't have patches. You got the game, and that was it. Right. And that's all you needed with that game was just the game.
And one of the things that is an advantage about that, though, is without patches, you literally just stuck the thing down in the N64, press the power button, and you went. You didn't have to wait for a 4-hour download to play the game that you bought. Now I just sound like an old man griping about how things were better in the good old days. But anyway.
Okay.
Number 2.
Number 2 on our list, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Speaking of games that reinvented the wheel.
Yeah, in a big way.
Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot to say. I think I'm the only reason that this one isn't number 1 because I didn't play it. I just didn't know about it growing up. For some reason, I guess I was never exposed to Zelda until later on. But
yeah, your first Zelda game was Wind Waker, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I did get to play a little bit of it one time just to kind of wander around, and I can see the appeal. But yeah, I just never really had the exposure to it. Otherwise, it would be number 1, I'm sure.
Well, at the time that it was on the 64, I actually was too afraid to play it because redeads are scary.
Redeads are freaking terrifying.
But that was back when, like I said, my first Zelda game was Link's Awakening. Officially, the first Zelda game that I played at all was A Link to the Past, and I thought it was Robin Hood because he was wearing green and he was shooting a bow and arrow. And I played it at my friend's house. I was like, "It's Robin Hood, cool. Can we play Robin Hood? I like that game."
Fair enough.
But playing all the top down 2D, and then I got the GameCube and got Wind Waker, and then I got the Master Quest to go with it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I found out what I had been missing.
Yeah, back when pre-release bonuses were actually good. I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. But just like all the different kinds of items that you could get riding around on Epona, and like just thinking of, I think the most recent Zelda game released before Ocarina of Time was A Link to the Past. Is that right?
The most recent new game, yes. Because I believe the color edition of Link's Awakening came out after that, but as far as new game, yes.
So looking at that kind of a jump from that sort of game to the next, obviously You still had your dungeons, and you got your special item in each dungeon that helped you progress through the rest of the game and whatnot. But like the jump to navigate a 3D world, the different sword mechanics that were entered in, the fact that you could have so much equipment at the ready at once, whereas I think Link's Awakening was just two, like, or no, Link's Awakening was just two, but A Link to the Past was also just two, if I remember right.
I want to say that's right. Yeah.
And then the different one thing you haven't really seen in a Zelda game since then is the spells, like the Nehru's love and Furor's wind and stuff like that.
Din's fire. Yeah.
Din's fire that had a really cool mechanic to help you warp or protect yourself. Yeah, you see it with the champion spirits.
Yeah.
But yeah,
similar.
and just to the time travel mechanic, just like you were saying with Majora's Mask, except not quite the same because you're going, of course, across 7 years, but to go through and re-explore all of Hyrule and what happens in 7 years of desolation, basically, and that up until that point, Ganon had always been a mainstay big bad. You get to see his origin as Ganondorf, which is really cool, looking back on it.
Yeah, I mean, with the story, with everything else, there's just, it's almost impossible to calculate how much influence this game had over the Zelda series and over games in general. Before we jump to Andrew, though, I did want to harp on one particular thing that you pointed out, and I won't go too long on this, but redeads are freaking terrifying.
Yes.
And the fact that, because especially if you look at redeads, not only when you come out of Hyrule Castle, I think the fact that one of the things that makes them so creepy is that this is a place that was always a safe zone. There were never any monsters in it.
Yeah.
When you come out of that and it's like 2 a.m. and you're 8 years old and you walk out and are expecting to see Hyrule Castle Town and you see a town full of redeads that start screaming at you and freeze you, dude, you're lucky if you don't crap yourself. Like, those things are horrifying. I don't see how that game's rated E. But anyway, and the torture chamber at the bottom of the well. But anyway, I won't.
I'll give it. Speaking of the redeads, they were even scary in Wind Waker, and
yeah, they're cartoony, but they're still scary.
that was my pumpkin I carved for last Halloween.
Well, I started Zelda back in the NES with that gold cartridge game. What was the name of that actual game? It was
Legend of
was
Zelda.
It was just The Legend of Zelda.
Right.
Like, I went from that to A Link to the Past, which to me was probably one of the best Zelda games ever to be put out.
Sure.
And then from there, I went to Ocarina of Time, and I think that this one could really be number one on everybody's list. Simply because of where it took Zelda. Like, starting with this game, Zelda just kind of took off. It went from being this little top-down, I mean, you basically just had a D-pad and that was it, to this world-exploring game. But all of the cool stuff aside, like beating Ganondorf with a bug net, okay, that was actually kind of stupid. But all the crazy stuff aside, my favorite thing about this, and probably what got me so hooked into video gaming, was their music. And here, the music from this game and the Zelda series in general, I would actually dare say that in the Nintendo world, the best music that you can find is in Zelda games.
Agreed.
You're not going to find it anywhere else. With Sony, I would say with Final Fantasy has the best music. But with Nintendo's Zelda is just amazing. Twilight Princess, when I heard that soundtrack, I've never played the game in my life. But man, you talk about chill bumps. That was the same way I felt when I played through and I heard the music. Like, you didn't just play it on the ocarina. When you got done, it would play the rest of the song for you with all of that beautiful old school sounding video game nonsense music. But it was gorgeous. Oh, it was so great. And I think
you could actually just play whatever you wanted to on the ocarina. I mean, obviously there are the songs that you can play, but it's an actual real musical instrument in the game that you can just play different notes on.
I think that was probably my favorite thing, was just playing it and hearing the music. Like Epona's song, I'll never forget that song for the rest of my life. Absolutely loved it.
Oh, I can still go back today and play all of the old songs. I've memorized the buttons that I have to press. But to your point, I can remember actually going to Gerudo Valley specifically to hear the music. I just sat there and didn't do anything, just listened to the music because of how much I like that music. I mean, the Legend of Zelda theme has been around for a while, and it's definitely great in that game, but Gerudo Valley, that's one that really never resurfaced to get in the Zelda series, and it's so good.
Everyone's first experience of classical guitar.
Right. But when it comes to this game, I really love. I already made the case for Majora's Mask and how much I love that game. But the thing that Ocarina of Time brings to the table that it doesn't, because Majora's Mask is much more personal and it's more of a like Link experiencing an existential crisis than it is some kind of epic quest. When you think about some kind of epic, sort of classic heroic adventure, Ocarina of Time's like the pinnacle. It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, it's a classic good versus evil tale. The characters are genuinely interesting. I would argue not quite as interesting as they are in Majora's Mask, but as far as the just sort of weight of what's going on, and you have to remember that this, again, is at a time where you didn't really have nearly as much information on games as you used to, and you didn't have nearly as many trailers. When you played this game as a kid, and you were, a kid in the game, and all of a sudden you emerge as a teenager, you didn't see that coming. And it was such a cool dynamic, and there was so much discovery from it. I think that honestly, sometimes now Nintendo games, or just video games in general, they have to be so hyped and they have to show so much of it to sort of convince you to buy the game that you lose a little bit of that. And in Ocarina of Time, there was so much discovery. There were so many new things that you could just sort of come up with yourself. There were ways to play the game that didn't even really have a whole lot to do with the main quest. You could do side quests like fishing and just little nuggets that they worked into it. And
chasing chickens,
getting killed by chickens, really whatever you wanted to do. But another thing that is so groundbreaking about this is Nintendo, with the last minute, decided we've got to just make this an open world. Because for a long time, they were going to do the same thing they did with Mario 64, where Ganon's Castle was like a hub world and you went to different levels.
Really?
And they just decided that, no, this is Zelda. We have to make it to where you're actually exploring Hyrule. And in a lot of ways, it was the first open world game ever. I mean, if you really think about it, you could do similar things in like Link to the Past and whatnot. But as far as like an open world 3D space, Legend of Zelda is definitely the first one that ever really did that. And so the way that they worked this thing together, sort of the epicness of the quest that you're on, I think that this is, I mean, by far one of the best games of all time.
And
Number one, the original Super Smash Brothers. And I mean, I definitely had it not quite as high on the list, but I can't complain. Super Smash Brothers is just a phenomenal game.
I'll go ahead and say I probably have the least to say about it, but I never owned the game. I personally think that Ocarina of Time should have been number one. I may not put it there myself, but looking at the final list, Ocarina of Time just should have been up there. But Super Smash Brothers is kind of like Mario Kart for me. Like, I'm not super good at it, but it's still fun. Like getting to run around and chase people with a hammer, and it goes do 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 whatever, you know, like that. That's never gonna get old. You got to play with Star Fox shooting guns. It was weird to see how Super Smash Brothers has progressed, or it's interesting. I won't say weird to see how it's progressed, but it's also stayed the same. Like, they've added more characters over the years, and they've improved the graphics, but pretty much the whole idea of the game is the same. You're on these platforms and you're trying to beat the sin out of someone else from the Nintendo world. I mean, that's it. And everybody has fun unless you're getting beat by a C sticker on the GameCube. But I was never good at it. I actually like the most recent Smash Brothers the most, but I can't hate on it. It's one of those games that, again, people who used to play it could go back and play it now and still enjoy it just as much today as they did back then. And I feel like I would be the same way, even though I'm terrible at the game.
It's Smash Brothers. I mean, you asked me what's my favorite game on N64, Smash Brothers. What's my favorite game on a GameCube? Smash Brothers. Favorite game on the Wii? Smash Brothers. Like,
Fair.
I've logged probably like 600, 700 hours playing Overwatch in the past 3 years.
Mhm.
Smash Brothers, playing like a decade and a half, 2 decades worth of Smash Brothers. I've probably logged well over 10,000 hours playing that. Me and my little brother would just sit, and thankfully, he wasn't a sore loser, so I could beat him over and over for 5 hours, and he'd still want to play with me, which was fair because I had an Asian friend who would do the same to me. Korean, but
Darn you, Koreans, Andrew.
it's a video
I was
game.
not even there.
Yeah, you ran him off.
Yeah, he killed us with Fox, man. My character in the original Smash Brothers was probably Samus. Samus was pretty legit. Had the homing rockets. Had the the charge ball that you could save up till the perfect moment. But it's better than Street Fighter. It's better than Mortal Kombat. It's like a fighting game, but it's not. It's like a fighting party game. It's just all around like. And then, you had the different items that were complete game changers, like the Pokeball, where the Pokeball could come out and completely wipe the stage for you. Or it could be like a Magikarp and do nothing, or a Mew and do nothing. But yeah, Smash Brothers, so many good times.
I couldn't agree more, and you and I have played a ton of Smash Brothers over the
Oh
years.
yeah, always Melee.
Yeah,
Oh, we played a lot on the Wii. Well,
we
that's the
played
thing.
ball a lot.
Once Melee came out, it was GameCube controller was the standard.
it still
So-
is. I still only use a
Mhm.
GameCube controller.
Mhm.
But yeah, you're right. And one thing that you brought up that I just wanted to talk about real quickly, the original doesn't have nearly as many characters, but just the fact that you could play as Nintendo property characters, I mean, that was revolutionary. It was something that had never been done before. And I remember I was so freaked out in a good way, but freaked out at the first trailer. Because you see that, you remember that
the
first
four
trailer?
costume guys
Yeah.
walking down the hill and they start pushing each other.
Right, and they're playing like Imagine Me and You and You and Me, and they just start beating up each other. It's like Donkey Kong, and you're like, "What is this?" And then it tells you, and you understand what it is. And so, even the commercials left a permanent mark on my memory. What'd you have to say on this one, Chris?
That we had no idea what we were in for. We
So
didn't
true.
know how big it was going to get, or how much it was going to grow over the years. It's a wonderful game. It's a fun game. It has a similar appeal to Mario Kart, where you get to play all these different characters against each other, but it's a wider scope because it's not just Mario. Now you have Pikachu. Now you have Samus. Now you've got all sorts of different characters, even though it was only like 14 or 16 or something like that to start with.
I think it's 12.
12, something like that.
Yeah.
And I will say, even the story mode, at least at the time, wasn't that bad. But you played it for the multiplayer. You played it to play with your friends and beat them up and knock them out in really crazy ways. Objectively, Ocarina of Time probably should be number one over Smash Brothers, but you can always play Smash Brothers and have fun. And it's just gotten better and better ever since.
Well, I actually think because of the way that we did this, I think it actually makes sense that Smash Brothers beat Ocarina of Time. Because I love Ocarina of Time. I think it's better than Smash Brothers. I make no bones about that. But why was Smash Brothers able to beat out Ocarina of Time? Mass appeal. Everybody can get into Smash Brothers. Ocarina of Time, most people can, but there is a certain you have to be kind of in a mood to play Ocarina of Time. As much as I love the new Smash Brothers, and if I had a choice between playing the old one and playing the one that's currently out for the Switch, I definitely play the one for the Switch. But I wouldn't be upset if I was relegated to playing the original. There was just so many cool things you could do with it. And one thing you brought up too, Chris, the story mode wasn't that good. I don't think that it lacked a lot of things that the newer one has, but honestly, in certain ways, I really liked the old story mode even better than some of the more recent sequels because you had the target practice, which was always one of my favorites, and each level was designed specifically to challenge the character that you were playing as in the moment. Master Hand admittedly was really fun and pretty good for what he was at the time. Granted, some characters were at a notable disadvantage when you were playing Master Hand. The fact that Metal Mario was a boss, which now just seems like not a big deal because Melee made metal characters kind of standard. But I mean, at the time, Metal Mario from Super Mario 64 making a cameo in Smash Brothers, that was huge. And that's probably where they get the idea of bringing in big, powerful bosses from different Nintendo games that they just now brought back. That's a feature that just now got integrated into the newest version of Smash Brothers that has been missing really since the original when they did when they did have well, I guess they kind of did that with Subspace Emissary to a degree. But the point is, like, it would be almost impossible to really quantify the scope at which this game and the franchise that it started changed fighting games and just games in general for decades. I mean, how many people specifically bought Nintendo consoles just so they could play Smash Brothers? The only reason I bought a Wii U, the only reason anyone probably bought a Wii U was to play the new Smash Brothers. I didn't buy a Wii U until they announced Smash Brothers was coming out. I was like, all right, now I got to get a Wii U. So, yeah. I mean, there's just not enough good you could say about it.
And it introduced me to a couple of Nintendo franchises that I might not have ever known otherwise, like Fire Emblem. And honestly, Animal Crossing, my first introduction to Animal Crossing was via Smash Brothers Melee trophies.
I did
not
know
what in the world is a Tom Nook?
There's a good chance Fire Emblem never even makes it to America without Smash Brothers.
Yeah. I mean, it said Japan only in the Melee game. It's like, right. But those characters seem kind of cool. What if it'd be nice. And then, was it Path of Radiance or Radiant Dawn? I can't remember which one came first. But it came out on the GameCube, and then the other one came out on the Wii with Ike as the main character.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, this game is awesome because it was a lot like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which I loved that game. And I wish there was more games like that in Advance Wars and whatnot. But Fire Emblem series is a lot like that kind of battle mechanic.
Until I played Samus or Captain Falcon, I'd never heard of their franchises either. So
yeah.
Same kind of thing. In fact, I thought they were from the same game for a long time because they were both bounty hunters. So I thought that they were actually bounty hunters in the same game. I didn't realize they were from different franchises.
Yeah.
But absolutely. So I want to go ahead and get everybody's final thoughts because we need to go ahead and start wrapping up.
The list, I think, with the exception of Kirby, because I never played it, I think everything deserved to be there. I think that, honestly, we probably could have done a 2.5-hour segment on the top 20, and probably 80% to 90% of all of our games would be on each other's list.
Probably.
So I don't have any... and the top 5 was obvious. Like, you just didn't know what order they were going to be in. But for the N64, probably... Man, I've played almost every console except for the Wii U since the N64 came out. And it has to still be my favorite console of all time. Like, there's just nothing that tops, considering what all has come out since then, what we had before then, and what this brought to the table at the time in our gaming history that it was presented. Like, it holds a special place in my heart, but it was so different, so new, it was so needed too. We needed that change in gaming to go away from the SNES and get into these 3D worlds. And so I think that the N64 has got to be the number one console. I don't think that there's another console on my list that would even come close. Everything would be like second and third place top, and nowhere close to the N64.
Well, I was late to the N64 period. I wasn't allowed to have video games when I was really young. And when I was 9 years old for Christmas in 1999, I finally got my first video game console, which was a Game Boy Color with Tetris. So that was my, you know, like I said, I had friends that I went over and played at their houses and everything. And like, I mowed my grandpa's lawn and I mowed our lawn and got like $5 or $10 to do it and got to do it about once a week. And I was like, Mom, can I get an N64 now? Because that was the thing at the time. It's like everybody at the lunchroom table was talking about N64. If you didn't have an N64, you couldn't join in the conversation. I was like, I got a Game Boy. They're like, that's cool, but we're talking about this over here. So I was like, can I get an N64, Mom? Well, you have to buy it yourself. I was, oh, okay. It's like $150. If only consoles were that cheap.
I know.
But back then, so I worked my butt off all summer long, mowing the grass until it wouldn't grow anymore. And I was like, Mom, I saved up all this money. Can you take me to Circuit City? Press F to pay respects. And to get a N64. And she's like, well, when you get it, where are you going to play it? I said, at home. But how? Plug it into the TV and play it. She's like, oh, no, not on my TV. I'm like, so what do I do? She's like, you have to buy your own TV. And I was like, okay, fine. So I was like, can you take me to Circuit City to buy a TV then? So I bought a 19-inch tube TV, which I had into college. That was the TV that I was replacing with the TVs that your mom was selling when the hotel was swapping out and they were selling the TVs for $25.
I remember that. I sold you that TV.
That is the TV that replaced the one I bought when I was 10 years old, buying a TV just so I could play N64 on it. And it lasted into my freshman year in high school. So I buy the TV, and then the next summer, I work my butt off again, resisting the urge to buy booster packs of Pokemon cards, and saved up my money again and bought the N64 finally. And it was the Hey You Pikachu special edition
Nice.
Pokemon N64, and Pikachu's cheeks light up when it's turned on. But and I finally got it, and it came with the Hey You Pikachu with the headset, which was a blast, by the way. That's why I got an honorable 10th place spot in my top 10, was because it was you could talk to Pikachu, which was really cool, and the voice recognition wasn't that great, so it was a little bit of a letdown, but I wanted it to work so bad.
It hasn't gotten much better with time.
No. Yeah, just try talking to Siri.
Exactly.
But and then I got the Smash Brothers, and I rented this. I rented Smash Brothers. I got the Pokemon Stadium, got the Kirby, and all that stuff. And then a year later, the GameCube comes out. It's like, well, now I need that, and I got it and got Smash Brothers. So I only had about a year and a half with the N64 itself, but I've gone back over the years because it's such a mainstay. It's such a staple that everybody played the N64. And then in this age of member berries, like everybody, I mean, that's what we're doing right now. But, there's nothing wrong with that. Playing the N64, people busting out their old N64s and, whatever with the newer consoles, let's spend the night playing the N64. And so it really, like they said, it revolutionized gaming at its time. It revolutionized the controller. That was a 3-prong control system. It had rumble
especially
features
designed for
time,
people with 3 hands.
We had 3 different positions that you could use. You could have the joystick in one hand or the other, or you could have it in neither. But yeah, definitely solid.
All right,
I've got a question for you real quick. Yeah? You said that you saved up the money, and then your mom says, no, not on my TV. You have to buy another TV. And so you had to go buy the TV and then work again and then go buy the N64. Is your mom related to Tom Nook?
No, because then she would have given me the TV and made me work it off. But I was so excited to have the TV that I went home, plugged it in, and watched Snow.
That's man.
Didn't even have funny ears.
I gotta tell you though, I had a similar thing, and I'm not gonna go through all the details, but I got my Nintendo 64 the same day that I got a little color 13-inch Sony TV. I mean, the little bitty one. And by the way, in similar fashion, that TV lasted me throughout my sophomore year of college. So Similar
Yeah.
thing, and that's what I always played my GameCube and my Nintendo 64 on. Chris, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, just a couple of closing thoughts. Anyone else ever rent an N64 game from Blockbuster and have the Be Kind, Please Rewind tape stuck around the cartridge?
Yes.
I
It was
remember that.
Banjo-Kazooie. I distinctly remember it.
Shout out to a couple of honorable mentions for me. My first ever video game on the N64, and I think ever, Pokemon Snap, which was actually pretty cool and interesting. I don't really think there's been a whole lot of games like it since. I thought that was a pretty neat game. Also, Paper Mario, I thought was also pretty innovative and interesting.
Also really
And
good.
finally, 1080 snowboarding, because that game was in every mall and at my dentist's office. It was everywhere.
I think that one was another launch title, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe so. But yeah, I think people, if they aren't already, which they might be, people are going to be restoring N64s like they're restoring record players.
I'd like to contrast what you and Ward said. Hey You Pikachu, fantastic concept, and what kid didn't want a Pikachu when they were a little kid? I mean, that game should have been a home run. Taking pictures of Pokemon, a game that literally nobody wanted, winds up being a great game. So, I don't know. But when
It's that idea of getting to see Pokemon in their natural habitat, more living the cartoon, like we were talking about earlier.
I guess
I
that's
think that was the appeal.
I think that's probably an aspect of the charm of it. It still is a good game. I still enjoy playing it. One thing that I wanted to bring up, though, before we close out, I really, really love this console. And in a lot of ways, I went back and I looked at all the different Nintendo consoles and I looked at the different games. My default answer to what's the greatest Nintendo system of all time has always been the Nintendo 64. Whenever anybody asks me, and maybe there's a nostalgia factor, I don't know, don't really care. But because it was my first console, I was 8 years old, you've got Majora's Mask, Super Mario 64, and one that we didn't mention tonight, but I think definitely deserves mention, Diddy Kong Racing, Beetle Adventure Racing, just so many fantastic games. It has a insane library. It was the first console to really bring you into the 3D space in a real way, a way that actually worked. There's just, you cannot say enough good about it. With reflection, I actually think, looking back at the games library, that the GameCube might actually be a better console, even though I'm still somewhat on the fence about it. But even if it is, and even if history remembers it as being the better console, you have to look at the Nintendo 64 as John the Baptist. Like, it paves the way. I know that that's a weird analogy, but Nintendo 64 is the John the Baptist of consoles. And the way that it just brought forth this whole new world of gaming that completely revolutionized not only the way Nintendo made games, but the way the entire gaming industry thought about video games and what video games could do. I mean, you just cannot overstate the overwhelming influence of the Nintendo 64 on video games as a whole. And the thing is, it wasn't just a transition period thing to where it's something that you kind of respect it, but at the end of the day, it's just something that everybody feels like they have to mention. No, we just looked at top 10 games tonight, and some of these games are some of the best games ever made. So without qualification, Nintendo 64, one of the best consoles ever made, in my opinion, still the best one. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close out. Thanks, guys, so much for being here with us this evening. It's been a real pleasure. And we'll be back here next week with another edition of the Geekend. In the meantime, stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2020.